The water is black glass under the moon, cold enough to kill a man in 12 minutes. Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Bleichrodt stands in the conning tower of U-109, his binoculars scanning the horizon where sky and ocean blur into one endless void. The wind carries salt and diesel fumes. Below him, in the iron belly of his boat, 42 men breathe the same stale air, sleep in the same damp bunks, eat the same molding bread. They are hunters. They have been hunters for 28 months, and they are very good at what they do. In the distance, barely visible against the darkness, a convoy crawls eastward. 30 merchant ships carrying grain, steel, fuel, the lifeblood of Britain. Bleichrodt's hand moves to the voice pipe. His orders are calm, practiced. The torpedoes are ready. The range is closing. And then from nowhere, the sea erupts. Depth charges. A British destroyer materializes from the black, her searchlights cutting the night like accusatory fingers, finding U-109 exactly where she should not be found. Bleichrodt screams the dive order. The boat plunges. The charges hammer the hull. In the control room, men grip pipes and stanchions, their faces white, their eyes asking the same silent question. How did they know? How did they always know? They did not yet understand that the ocean had betrayed them, that every coded message sent from Admiral Dönitz's headquarters in Lorient, every position report transmitted from one U-boat to another, every operational order encrypted by the Enigma machine, every single word, had been read by the enemy for months. The hunters had become the hunted, and they did not even know they were naked. The Enigma machine was supposed to be unbreakable. It was a marvel of German engineering, a mechanical cipher device that transformed plain German text into scrambled gibberish through a series of rotating wheels called rotors. Each letter pressed on the keyboard would light up a different letter on the lamp board, encrypted through billions of possible combinations. The German Navy used a particularly sophisticated version, the M4 Enigma, introduced in February 1942, with 4 rotors instead of 3, multiplying the possible settings into the astronomical. The mathematicians in Berlin had calculated it would take 1,000 years to break a single day's settings by brute force. The U-boat commanders trusted it with their lives, because they had been told it was mathematically impossible for the enemy to read their mail. They transmitted their positions, their fuel states, their attack plans, their rendezvous coordinates. They believed the Enigma kept them invisible. They were wrong. The story of how they became wrong begins not in the North Atlantic, but in a country manor house in Buckinghamshire, England, 50 miles northwest of London. Bletchley Park, a Victorian estate converted into the nerve center of Britain's code-breaking operation. Here, in wooden huts scattered across the grounds, mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, and crossword enthusiasts worked in shifts around the clock, attacking the German codes. Hut 8 was dedicated to naval Enigma. The air inside smelled of cigarette smoke and unwashed bodies and the peculiar metallic scent of desperation. On the walls, blackboards covered in chalk equations. On the desks, stacks of encrypted intercepts, radio messages captured by listening stations dotting the British coast, each message a puzzle, each puzzle a potential key to saving lives. The man who broke the puzzle was 29 years old, awkward, brilliant, and utterly relentless. Alan Turing, a Cambridge mathematician who thought in abstractions and built machines from logic. He arrived at Bletchley Park in September 1939, 2 weeks after war was declared, and immediately understood that human minds alone could not defeat Enigma. The permutations were too vast, the time too short. So Turing designed something new, a machine to fight a machine. He called it the bomb, named after an earlier Polish design, but his version was faster, more sophisticated, a 6-foot-tall cabinet filled with rotating drums that simulated Enigma's rotors, clicking through thousands of settings per minute, searching for contradictions, exploiting the one weakness in the German system: human error. German operators, trained to follow procedure, often made mistakes. They reused message preambles. They encrypted weather reports with predictable formats. They sent routine signals at predictable times. These cribs, as Bletchley called them, gave Turing's bomb a starting point. The machine would test hypotheses, eliminate impossibilities, narrow the billions of combinations down to dozens, then to one. And when it found the correct settings, the day's traffic would suddenly bloom into readable German. By mid-1941, Hut 8 was reading some German naval traffic, but not enough. The U-boats operated under strict radio discipline, transmitting only when necessary, using short, coded messages that offered few cribs. Turing needed more intercepts, more context, more luck. The luck came in May 1941, when the Royal Navy captured U-110 intact after a depth charge attack. British sailors boarded the stricken boat before it sank and seized everything: code books, cipher tables, and an Enigma machine itself. The captured documents gave Bletchley the cribs they needed. Within weeks, Hut 8 was reading current U-boat traffic. The intelligence product was codenamed Ultra, classified above top secret, restricted to a handful of commanders who were forbidden to act on it too obviously, lest the Germans realize their codes were compromised. The information flowed from Bletchley to the Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Center, where Commander Roger Wynne plotted U-boat positions on a giant map of the Atlantic. Convoys were rerouted around Wolfpacks. Destroyers and corvettes were vectored toward U-boats transmitting on the surface. The hunters became the hunted, and they did not understand why. The U-boat men expected victory. They had been promised it. In the autumn of 1940, during the so-called happy time, Donitz's boats had sunk merchant ships faster than Britain could replace them. Convoys burned on the horizon. Tonnage figures climbed into the hundreds of thousands. The U-boat crews returned to Lorient and Saint-Nazaire draped in flowers, their commanders decorated with Knight's Crosses, their successes celebrated in newsreels. They were the elite, the tip of Germany's spear, the force that would starve Britain into submission. Dönitz called it the tonnage war. Sink ships faster than the enemy can build them, and the war is won. The mathematics were simple. The execution required courage, skill, and secrecy. The U-boat men had the first two. They believed they had the third. But beginning in mid-1941, the Atlantic changed. Convoys that should have sailed into ambushes altered course at the last minute, passing miles away from waiting Wolfpacks. U-boats that surfaced to charge batteries found themselves bracketed by destroyers that appeared from nowhere. Patrol lines carefully established by Dönitz across convoy routes sat empty, while merchant ships steamed past undetected. The kill rates dropped. The losses climbed. Experienced commanders who had survived a dozen patrols vanished without trace. By the end of 1941, the U-boat force was losing boats faster than the shipyards could replace them, and the men who went to sea began to understand that something fundamental had shifted. They did not blame Enigma. They blamed bad luck, enemy radar, traitors, superstition. In the cramped wardrooms of the U-boats, officers discussed the possibilities in low voices. Some thought the British had developed a new type of radar that could detect a submarine's schnorkel. Others believed there were spies in the French ports watching the boats leave and radioing their positions to London. A few, the paranoid ones, whispered that perhaps the codes were compromised. But the cryptographers in Berlin insisted it was impossible. Enigma was unbreakable. The naval staff believed them. And so the U-boats kept transmitting, kept reporting their positions, kept dying. The second happy time came in early 1942, when Germany declared war on the United States and sent U-boats to the American coast. Suddenly, the hunting was easy again. American cities refused to dim their lights. silhouetting merchant ships against the glow. The U.S. Navy had not yet organized coastal convoys, and tankers sailed alone, unescorted, fat targets against the horizon. For 6 months, U-boats operated off New York, Cape Hatteras, the mouth of the Mississippi, sinking ships at will. But even this success was temporary. By mid-1942, the Americans had learned. Convoys were established, aircraft patrols increased, and ultra-coverage expanded. Bletchley Park had cracked the new M4 naval Enigma in December 1942 after nearly a year of blackout. The codebreakers had captured another boat, U-559, in the Mediterranean, and British sailors had died going into the sinking submarine to retrieve the cipher materials. Their sacrifice restored Ultra. By early 1943, Hut-8 was reading nearly all U-boat traffic, often within hours of transmission. The Admiralty knew where every Wolfpack was positioned. Convoys were routed through the gaps. Hunter-killer groups were dispatched to the known coordinates. The U-boats, still transmitting faithfully, still trusting their Enigma machines, were slaughtered. March 1943. The turning point. Donitz massed 40 U-boats against 2 convoys, SC-122 and HX-229, in the largest Wolfpack operation of the war. On paper, it should have been a massacre. 40 submarines against 90 merchant ships. But Ultra had read the orders. The Admiralty knew the Wolfpack positions. Reinforcements were rushed to the convoys. Destroyers, corvettes, long-range B-24 Liberators flying from Iceland and Newfoundland. The battle lasted 5 days. 21 merchant ships were sunk, a terrible loss, but 13 U-boats were destroyed or damaged, and the Wolfpack was scattered. Donitz called off the attack. It was the first time he had ever retreated from a convoy battle. More importantly, it was the moment the Atlantic War shifted irrevocably. After March 1943, the U-boats could no longer operate in the mid-Atlantic gap where air cover had previously been absent. The gap was closed by long-range aircraft equipped with radar and depth charges. The convoys grew stronger, their escorts more numerous, their tactics more sophisticated. And every time a U-boat transmitted its position, Ultra read it, and the trap closed a little tighter. The U-boat men did not surrender easily. They were brave, often fanatically so, drilled in the mythology of duty and sacrifice. They went to sea knowing the odds. By 1943, the life expectancy of a U-boat crew was measured in patrols, not years. 75% of all men who served in U-boats would die. They knew this. They went anyway. In the bases at Lorient and Brest, in the concrete submarine pens that even Allied bombs could not destroy, the crews prepared for each patrol with a mixture of resignation and grim humor. They packed their few belongings, wrote letters to be mailed if they did not return, and walked down the long piers to their boats. The boats themselves were marvels of claustrophobic engineering, 250 feet long, 20 feet wide, divided into compartments so cramped that men slept in shifts and ate standing up. The smell was indescribable. Diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, battery acid, spoiled food, the chemical toilets that could only be flushed under certain conditions. After 2 weeks at sea, the air was so foul that matches would not light. After 4 weeks, men's skin erupted in boils and rashes. After 6 weeks, some crews bordered on madness, and yet they endured, because they believed in the mission, because they believed in Germany, because they believed their sacrifice mattered. What they did not know was that their sacrifice was being read in real time by the enemy, that every weather report, every convoy sighting, every order from Donitz was decrypted at Bletchley Park and passed to the Admiralty within hours. The Operational Intelligence Center became so proficient at tracking U-boats that analysts could predict their movements with eerie accuracy. A U-boat leaving Brest would transmit its position once it cleared the Bay of Biscay. Ultra would decrypt the message. Aircraft would be dispatched. The boat would be attacked before it even reached the operational area. This happened again and again. The Germans investigated. They sent technical teams to inspect the Enigma machines, looking for flaws. They found none. They interrogated returned crews, searching for evidence of spies or indiscretion. They found nothing. The possibility that the Enigma itself was compromised was considered and dismissed because the mathematics said it was impossible. And so the U-boats kept transmitting, and Ultra kept reading, and the submarines kept dying. The symbolic object of this betrayal was not a weapon or a tool, but something more insidious: the radio itself. The FUMB radio transmitter, standard on every U-boat, was both lifeline and curse. It allowed Dönitz to coordinate his Wolfpacks, to concentrate boats against spotted convoys, to direct the tonnage war from his headquarters. But every transmission was a beacon. Every message, no matter how brief, was captured by British listening stations and forwarded to Bletchley Park. The more Dönitz communicated, the more he revealed. And Dönitz loved to communicate. He was a micromanager, a hands-on commander who sent detailed orders to individual boats, repositioning them like chess pieces. His operational headquarters in Lorient maintained constant contact with the fleet. The U-boat commanders called him the Lion, and they obeyed him without question. But every order he sent, encrypted by Enigma and transmitted by radio, was an invitation for the enemy to listen. The radio was the instrument of German efficiency, and it became the instrument of German destruction. By 1944, the U-boat war was lost. The statistics were undeniable. In 1943 alone, 244 U-boats were destroyed. New boats were being commissioned and sent to sea with crews that had barely 6 weeks of training. The experienced commanders were dead, replaced by boys who had never seen combat. The technology had shifted as well. Allied radar had improved to the point where it could detect a surfaced submarine at night in rough seas. Sonar had become more accurate. Depth charges had been supplemented by head-throwing weapons like Hedgehog, which could saturate a submarine's position with explosives before the boat could maneuver. And Ultra continued to read every message, tracking every boat, directing every attack. The U-boats were not merely outnumbered or outgunned. They were outthought, their every move anticipated, their every plan known in advance. They were fighting an enemy who could see in the dark, and they were losing. The German naval staff finally began to suspect the truth in late 1943. The coincidences had become too frequent, the ambushes too precise. A few officers whispered that perhaps the codes were broken. But how? The Enigma was unbreakable. The mathematics proved it. And so alternative explanations were sought. Perhaps the Allies had developed a new type of radar, one that could detect the metal hull of a submarine even when submerged. Perhaps they were using infrared sensors to track heat signatures. Perhaps there were spies in the French ports, or traitors among the crews. These theories were investigated exhaustively. New equipment was installed, new procedures implemented. The Enigma settings were changed more frequently. Additional rotors were introduced. Operators were retrained. None of it mattered. Ultra adapted. Bletchley Park's codebreakers, now numbering in the thousands, continued to break the naval codes sometimes within minutes of transmission. The Germans were fighting an invisible enemy, one they could not comprehend because they could not believe their most secure system had been compromised. There is a documented moment, preserved in the war diary of the U-boat command, when reality began to intrude. May 1943. Dönitz had withdrawn his boats from the North Atlantic after the catastrophic losses of March and April. He was waiting for new technology: acoustic torpedoes, improved radar detectors, schnorkels that would allow boats to recharge batteries without surfacing. But the losses continued even in the safer waters around the Azores and the Caribbean. On May 24th, Dönitz wrote in his diary, "The enemy has succeeded in overcoming our U-boat operations through new detection methods. The situation is very serious. We must assume the enemy can locate our boats even when submerged." But even then, he did not suspect Enigma. He assumed it was technology, not mathematics. He was wrong, and his men paid the price. The human cost was staggering. Of the 40,000 men who served in U-boats during the war, 30,000 died, 75%. No other branch of any military, in any nation, in any war, suffered such losses. The U-boat service was not merely dangerous, it was a death sentence. The men who volunteered knew this, especially toward the end, and yet they volunteered. Some were motivated by duty, others by ideology, still others by a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They climbed into their iron coffins and sailed into the Atlantic, and most of them never came back. Their bodies rest on the seabed, entombed in the wrecks of their boats, surrounded by the debris of their lives. Photographs of girlfriends, letters from mothers, the chess sets and playing cards they used to pass the time. The ocean does not judge. It simply keeps them. The transformation was not merely tactical, but psychological. The U-boat crews had gone to war believing they were invisible, that the ocean was their ally, that the Enigma machine made them ghosts. They discovered they were wrong. The ocean was indifferent, and the machine had betrayed them. The psychological impact of this realization, though never explicitly understood during the war, was devastating. Commanders who had once attacked convoys with aggression and confidence became cautious, hesitant, afraid. Crews that had once trusted their equipment and their orders began to doubt. The morale reports from the U-boat flotillas in 1944 make grim reading. Men were cracking under the strain, refusing to patrol, feigning illness, even attempting suicide. The boats that did sail often returned early, their commanders citing mechanical problems or bad weather. The truth, unspoken but understood, was that they were terrified. They were being hunted by an enemy who seemed omniscient, and there was no defense against omniscience. Meanwhile, in Hut 8 at Bletchley Park, the codebreakers continued their work. They did not know the names of the men they were killing. They did not see the U-boats die, did not hear the screams of men drowning in flooded compartments, did not witness the moment when a depth charge ruptured a pressure hull and the ocean rushed in. They saw only messages, strings of letters transformed into strings of different letters, puzzles to be solved. Alan Turing himself, the architect of the bomb, the man whose genius had broken Enigma, never went to sea, never saw a convoy, never met a U-boat survivor. He worked in abstraction, in the realm of pure logic, and his work saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Merchant sailors, naval personnel, the civilians of Britain who would have starved if the U-boats had won the tonnage war. But the cost of that salvation was paid in German blood, in the bodies of 30,000 submariners who died because a machine they trusted had been defeated by a better machine, operated by a better mind. The irony is that the Germans came close to realizing the truth several times. In 1943, a Kriegsmarine cryptographic team conducted an exhaustive analysis of Enigma security and concluded that while it was theoretically possible the machine could be broken, the effort required would be so enormous that no enemy could sustain it. They were half right. The effort was enormous. Bletchley Park at its peak employed over 10,000 people, working in shifts, operating dozens of bombs, processing thousands of intercepts daily. It was the largest code-breaking operation in history, and it consumed vast resources, money, personnel, time, the most brilliant minds Britain could muster. But the British sustained it, because the alternative was losing the war. The Germans assumed no enemy would make that investment. They were wrong, and their assumption killed their submariners. The final chapter of the U-boat. War was not dramatic. There was no climactic battle, no moment of surrender. The boats simply stopped winning. By the summer of 1944, with the Allies ashore in Normandy and the Red Army advancing from the east, the U-boats were reduced to a nuisance. They sank a few ships, disrupted a few convoys, but they no longer threatened Britain's survival. The new type WW2 submarines, fast enough underwater to outrun destroyers, began appearing in early 1945, but by then Germany was collapsing. The war ended in May 1945. Dönitz, who had succeeded Hitler as head of state in the final days, ordered the U-boat fleet to surrender. Most did. A few commanders scuttled their boats rather than give them to the enemy. A handful fled to neutral ports in South America. The war diary of the U-boat command ends with a final entry on May 4, 1945. All U-boats cease hostilities. After nearly 6 years, the killing stopped. The Enigma secret was kept for 30 years after the war ended. The British continued to use captured Enigma machines for their own purposes, and they did not want potential adversaries to know the cipher had been broken. Bletchley Park was dismantled, its personnel dispersed under strict orders never to discuss their work. Alan Turing was prohibited from receiving public recognition for his contributions. He died in 1954 at the age of 41 from cyanide poisoning, officially ruled a suicide, though some have questioned the verdict. The truth about Ultra did not emerge until the mid-1970s when the British government declassified some of the wartime intelligence files. By then, most of the people involved were dead. The U-boat veterans who survived the war and lived into old age were stunned to learn that their messages had been read, their positions known, their efforts futile. Some refused to believe it. Others felt a grim sense of vindication. They had suspected something was wrong, and now they knew. A few expressed something like relief, because at least now the mystery was solved. They had not been defeated by bad luck or cowardice or incompetence. They had been defeated by mathematics. The Enigma machine sits today in museums across the world, a small metal box with a keyboard and rotors and plug board, innocuous and obsolete. Visitors can see it behind glass, read the placards explaining how it worked, understand intellectually that this device was once the guardian of Germany's deepest secrets. But they cannot feel what the U-boat crews felt when they trusted it, cannot comprehend the betrayal implicit in its failure. The machine did not lie. It did exactly what it was designed to do, encrypting messages with billions of possible combinations. But it could not account for human error, for the cribs and patterns and predictable phrases that German operators used. It could not defend against a mind like Turing's, a mind willing to think beyond conventional boundaries, to build machines that fought machines, to wage war in the realm of pure logic. The Enigma was a masterpiece of engineering, but it was defeated by a masterpiece of intellect. The larger truth that emerges from the wreckage of the U-boat war is this: secrecy is an illusion. The Germans believed they had created an unbreakable code, and they built an entire strategy around that belief. They sent 30,000 men to their deaths because they could not imagine that the enemy might be smarter, more dedicated, more willing to invest in the invisible war of intelligence. They learned too late that no system is invulnerable, that every cipher can be broken, that trust in technology must be tempered with humility and doubt. The U-boats were not defeated by destroyers or depth charges or aircraft, though all of those played their part. They were defeated by information, by the patient, relentless work of mathematicians and linguists who turned German confidence into German catastrophe. The Atlantic is deep and cold, and it keeps its dead. But the lesson of the Enigma remains, floating on the surface. In war, the side that knows more wins. And in the War of Codes, Britain knew everything,